The chapel at Combat Outpost Viper was barely more than a tent with folding chairs and a makeshift altar fashioned from ammunition crates covered in white cloth. But for the 12 Marines who'd shown up for Wednesday evening service, it was a moment of peace in the middle of a war that never stopped grinding. Outside, the Iraqi desert stretched endlessly under a blood-red sunset. Guard towers bristled with machine guns. Sandbag walls formed a desperate perimeter against an enemy that could strike from any direction. 50 miles outside Fallujah, Cop Viper was a lonely outpost in hostile territory, manned by Marines too young to drink legally back home. Inside the tent, Chaplain William Grey stood at the front, his weathered Bible open to Psalms. 60 years old, gray hair cut military short despite his non-combatant status. Reading glasses perched on his nose. A simple cross hanging from a chain around his neck. His voice carried quiet strength as he read, the words flowing like water over stones worn smooth by time. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" In the back row, Corporal David Jackson, 20 years old, 3 months in country, nudged Lance Corporal Martinez and whispered, loud enough for half the tent to hear, "Bet the old man's never even held a rifle. Probably thinks we win wars with thoughts and prayers." Suppressed laughter rippled through the group. Even the Marines who came to service regularly had to admit the chaplain seemed out of place in a combat zone. What did a 60-year-old preacher know about fighting? Private First Class Chun leaned over. Heard he's been Navy chaplain for like 30 years. Desk duty. Probably volunteered for Iraq to check a box before retirement. More snickers. Lieutenant Marcus Hayes, sitting in the front row, turned and gave them a sharp look. "Show some respect." Jackson shrugged, unbothered. "Just saying, sir. When stuff gets real, we need shooters, not preachers." No offense to the chaplain. Grey didn't acknowledge the comment. His eyes never left the page. His voice never wavered. "When the wicked advance against me to devour me, it is my enemies and my foes who will stumble and fall." But those who knew how to look, really look, might have noticed something. The way his right hand rested on the altar, fingers drumming a pattern. 4 beats. Pause. 4 beats. The rhythm of a combat breath. In for 4. Hold 4. Out for 4, that the breathing pattern of someone who'd been under fire before. "Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then I will be confident." He turned the page, his movements deliberate, controlled. On his left forearm, just visible beneath the rolled sleeve of his utility uniform, was a tattoo most had never noticed. Faded with age. A simple eagle, globe, and anchor to USMC. 1968. And beneath it, in script so small you had to be looking for it, Semper Fi. Boom! The RPG hit the western perimeter wall at exactly 1947 hours, turning the Iraqi dusk into instant, terrible daylight. The shockwave tore through the chapel tent. Marines were thrown from their chairs. The makeshift altar toppled. Grey's Bible flew from his hands, pages fluttering. For one frozen heartbeat, there was only ringing silence. Then the world exploded into chaos. AK-47 fire erupted from every direction. North, south, east, west. Tracer rounds sliced through the darkness like angry hornets. Another RPG hit the fuel depot, sending a column of fire into the sky. Contact. 360-degree ambush. All hands. The base alarm shrieked. Marines scrambled, stumbling over chairs, grabbing for weapons they'd left outside the tent. Young faces twisted with panic. Jackson hit the dirt, crawling toward the exit. His earlier bravado had evaporated. This wasn't training. This was real. This was death screaming through the air at supersonic speed. Lieutenant Hayes grabbed his rifle from the rack outside, his hands shaking. 23 years old. 7 weeks in country. His first real firefight, and it was already catastrophic. "Where's the QRF? How long until air support?" The radio operator, crouched behind a sandbag wall, shouted back over the gunfire. 30 minutes minimum, sir. We're on our own. 30 minutes. That they be overrun in 10. Hayes looked around desperately. His platoon, most barely out of higь school, were scattered, disorganized, some firing wildly into the darkness, wasting ammunition on shadows. No cohesion, no fire discipline, pure panic. They were going to die here. And then a hand, firm, steady, unshakable, grabbed his shoulder. Hayes spun around. Chaplain Grey stood there, but he wasn't the same man who'd been reading scripture 30 seconds ago. His reading glasses were gone. His Bible lay forgotten in the dirt. And in his hands, where the hell had he gotten it, was an M4 rifle that he held with the casual, unconscious competence of someone who'd been born with one that his entire posture had changed. No longer the slight hunch of an aging preacher. Now his shoulders were squared, his stance wide and balanced, his eyes scanning the perimeter with the methodical precision of a combat veteran reading terrain. "Chaplain, what are you, Lieutenant?" Grey's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Different now, harder, carrying command authority that made Hayes's spine straighten instinctively. "I need you to listen very carefully." Another explosion rocked the base. Mortars now. They were being bracketed. Grey's eyes never stopped moving, cataloging threats, calculating angles. "How many effectives do you have?" Hayes blinked, trying to process. "I what? How many Marines can fight?" Each word precise, clipped, demanding an answer. 12, maybe 15. Ammunition status." "We've got, I don't know." Grey grabbed Hayes by the front of his flak jacket, his grip iron. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Son, in about 90 seconds, 80 insurgents are going to try to breach this perimeter. If you don't get your Marines organized, half of them will be dead before that happens. So I'm going to ask you one more time. Are you going to lead, or am I?" Hayes stared into those eyes, gray cold, utterly calm despite the hell breaking loose around them, and saw something that didn't belong in a man of God, the eyes of someone who'd done this before. Many times before. "You," Hayes heard himself say. "You take it." Grey nodded once, released him, and turned to the scattered Marines. When he spoke, his voice carried across the compound with parade ground authority that cut through the gunfire. "Marines, on me, now." And they came, not because of his rank, chaplains had none, not because of his age, but because something in that voice triggered trained instincts deeper than conscious thought. 12 Marines materialized from chaos, taking knee in a rough circle around him. Grey's voice was steady, calm, each word clear. "Corporal Jackson, Private Chin, you're on the north wall. Overlapping fields of fire, 3-round bursts, no full auto. Conserve ammunition." Jackson opened his mouth to question. Why was the chaplain giving tactical orders? But something in Grey's expression made him shut it and move. "Martinez, Williams, east wall." Same drill. Marines moved without question now, muscle memory overriding confusion. "Hayes," Grey continued, his eyes already scanning the perimeter. "You're with me on south approach. That's where they'll make their main push. It's what I do." The lieutenant found himself nodding, accepting tactical direction from a 60-year-old chaplain like it was the most natural thing in the world. Grey chambered around, the action smooth and practiced. "They're going to probe our defenses first. Test our response. Don't waste ammunition on suppressive fire. Aim shots only. Make them think we're dug in deeper than we are." He looked at each Marine in turn, and when he spoke again, something ancient stirred in his voice. Something that had been buried for decades. "I'm going to keep you alive for the next 30 minutes. After that, air support arrives and we're golden. But for 30 minutes, you do exactly what I say. Exactly when I say it. Are we clear?" "Yes, sir." The response was automatic, unified. Grey almost smiled. "I'm not a sir. I work for a living." It was an old Marine joke, enlisted calling out officers, but coming from a chaplain, it made no sense unless… Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to Army Story so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Fire Base Julie, Vietnam. March 1968. 23-year-old Sergeant William Grey crouched in a fighting hole, M16 pressed to his shoulder, watching the jungle tree lean 200 meters out. Force Recon. Third Tour. The kind of Marine who'd volunteered for the deepest, darkest missions because sitting on a ship drove him crazy. Grey, his lieutenant, had asked once, "Why do you keep extending? You've got enough time for an honorable discharge." "Can't leave my brothers, sir," he'd answered simply. Now those brothers were dead. All 14 of them. Overrun 2 hours ago in an NVA assault that should have been a routine patrol. Grey was the only one left. Out of ammunition. Down to his K-bar knife and a handful of grenades. The NVA were coming. 300 strong. He could hear them moving through the jungle. Could hear their officers shouting orders in Vietnamese that he should have run. Should have E and amp. Ed into the jungle, tried to make it to friendly lines. But 15 bodies lay in the firebase behind him. His brothers. His family. And William Grey had never left a brother behind. He waited. Grenades lined up. Knife ready. And when they came, when 300 enemy soldiers charged that firebase, he met them with the quiet, terrible fury of a man who'd already decided he wasn't walking away. When the Huey extraction team finally arrived 6 hours later, they found bodies everywhere. And in the center of it all, Sergeant William Grey, bleeding from 7 wounds, still standing, still fighting. 23 confirmed kills. With a knife and captured enemy weapons, they gave him the Marine Corps Cross. Quietly. The mission had never officially happened, and they gave him a nickname that followed him for the rest of his career, the Chaplain's Devil, because even covered in blood, even surrounded by death, William Grey had been whispering prayers for every man who fell, enemy and friend alike. The first probe came exactly as Grey predicted. 20 insurgents rushed the north wall, firing wildly, trying to draw return fire, trying to gauge how many Marines were defending the outpost. Hold fire. Grey's voice cut through the instinct to shoot back. Marines' fingers tightened on triggers, but held. The insurgents got closer. 50 meters. 40. Hold. 30 meters. Jackson, on the north wall, whispered urgently into his radio. "Chaplain, they're coming." "I know." Hold. 20 meters. Now. Control pairs. Center mass. 12M4S spoke as one. Short, controlled bursts. 3-round discipline. Half the attacking force went down in the first volley. The rest scattered, retreating into the darkness. Grey's voice was calm over the radio. "Ceasefire. Reload. They'll be back in 3 minutes. Same spot. They think it's our weak point." Hayes, crouched next to Grey on the south wall, stared. "How do you know that?" "Because it's what I do." Grey's eyes never stopped scanning. "They'll hit north again to fix our attention, then push south with their main force. 50, maybe 60 fighters. That's where we need to be ready." "How do you?" Hayes started, then stopped as understanding began to dawn. "Chaplain, what were you before?" Grey didn't answer. He was already moving, repositioning Marines with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "Chun, shift 10 meters left. You're silhouetted against that fire. Martinez, get lower. Williams, watch that dead space at the corner. That's an infiltration route." Each instruction was precise, tactical, professional. Hayes followed, his rifle ready, his mind racing. This wasn't a chaplain. This was a combat veteran, an experienced infantry leader. Maybe more. The second assault came at 2003 hours. Exactly as Grey predicted. North wall first, heavy fire, drawing attention. And then the south wall erupted with movement. 60 insurgents moving in a coordinated assault, RPGs and AKs laying down covering fire. "Here they come." Hayes shouted. Steady, Grey's voice was ice. "Let them commit. Wait for my command." The insurgents closed. 40 meters. 30. Grey stood, silhouetted against the firelight, utterly calm. He raised his M4, stock welded to his shoulder, breathing controlled. Fire. His first 3 rounds dropped 3 runners. Center mass. Professional. Efficient. Around him, Marines followed his example. Aimed fire. Controlled bursts. No panic. The insurgent assault broke against their fire discipline like water against stone. But they kept coming. Grey moved along the line, firing, reloading, directing. Jackson, 2 o'clock, behind the berm. Chun, suppressing fire on that truck. Hayes, watch your left flank." He wasn't a chaplain anymore. He was a combat leader, a warrior, and the young Marines who'd mocked him an hour ago now followed his every command without question, because he was keeping them alive. At 2017 hours, an RPG blew a hole in the south wall. 20 insurgents poured through the gap before Hayes could react. They were inside the perimeter, close quarters, deadly. "Fall back." Hayes screamed. "Negative." Grey's voice overrode him. "If we give ground, they'll split our defense. Hold the line." He charged forward, this 60-year-old man, directly into the breach. His M4 barked in controlled 3-round bursts. 1 insurgent down. 2, 3. He moved like smoke, like violence given form. Each step deliberate, each shot precise. Hayes watched in awe as Grey cleared the breach single-handedly. No wasted movement, no hesitation, pure, terrible competence. When his magazine ran dry, Grey didn't even slow. He transitioned to his sidearm, where had he got a sidearm, and kept firing. An insurgent rushed him with a knife. Grey sidestepped, trapped the arm, broke the wrist, and put 2 rounds center mass without breaking stride. "Sweet Jesus," Martinez whispered, watching from the wall. Grey wasn't just fighting, he was dominating. And then Hayes saw it, saw what years of desk duty and peaceful chaplain work had hidden. The scars. Grey's sleeve had torn in the fight, revealing his left arm. It was covered in old shrapnel wounds, bullet scars, burned tissue. The arm of someone who'd been through hell and walked back out. "Who is he?" Jackson shouted. Hayes didn't answer. He was too busy fighting. But pieces were falling into place. The way Grey moved, the way he fought, the tactical precision. This wasn't just a Marine. This was someone from the dark years. Vietnam, the jungle wars, the kind of Marine who did things that never made it into official records. At 20:27 hours, 31 minutes after the first RPG, the sound of rotors cut through the gunfire. Apache helicopters, F-18s screaming overhead. The cavalry had arrived. The remaining insurgents broke and ran. It was over. Hayes sat against a sandbag wall, chest heaving, hands shaking from adrenaline. Around him, Marines checked themselves for wounds, counted ammunition, processed the fact that they were still alive. 0 casualties. Not one. Against 80 attackers. It was impossible. Unless you had William Grey. The chaplain stood in the center of the compound, his M4 lowered, breathing steady. His utility uniform was torn and bloody, not all of it his own. The cross around his neck caught the firelight. Captain Morrison, the company commander, arrived with the QRF 15 minutes later. He stepped out of the Humvee and froze, staring at the kill zone. The tactically perfect defensive positions. The 47 dead insurgents arranged in patterns that spoke of professional soldiering. "Lieutenant Hayes," Morrison said slowly. "Report." Hayes tried to find words. "Sir, we were ambushed. 360 degrees. At least 80 hostiles. And..." Hayes gestured helplessly at Grey. "The chaplain took command, sir." Morrison turned to look at the 60-year-old man cleaning his rifle with practiced efficiency. The chaplain. "Yes, sir." Hayes swallowed. He fought like, "Sir, I've never seen anything like it." He moved like special forces. Like recon. Like a Marine, Grey said quietly, not looking up from his weapon. Morrison studied him for a long moment. Then he pulled out his satellite phone and made a call. The conversation was brief, quiet, but Hayes saw the captain's face go pale. When Morrison hung up, he walked slowly to Grey and did something that made every Marine in the compound freeze. He came to attention and saluted. A captain, saluting a chaplain. "Sergeant Major Grey," Morrison said formally. "I've been informed of your service record, or what parts of it I'm cleared to know." Grey finally looked up. "Captain. 45 years classified, sir. Force Recon. 3 tours Vietnam. Marine Corps Cross. Silver Star. 3 Purple Hearts." Morrison's voice was tight with emotion. "They told me you retired in 1995 with the highest enlisted rank in the Corps. came back as a chaplain in 2001 because you couldn't stay away. The young Marine stared. Corporal Jackson, who'd mocked him 90 minutes ago, felt his stomach drop. Morrison lowered his salute. They also told me your call sign. From Vietnam. Grey's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. Morrison turned to address the entire platoon. Marines, you were just saved by a legend. Sergeant Major William Grey. Call sign, the Chaplain's Devil. Force Recon. One of the most decorated enlisted Marines in Corps history. Silence. Then, one by one, 12 young Marines came to attention and saluted. Not saluting the chaplain, saluting the warrior. Grey stood there for a moment, his weathered face unreadable. Then he returned the salute, sharp and precise. Semper Fi, he said quietly. Semper Fi, they echoed. 3 days later, the chaplain's tent was packed for Sunday service. Every Marine in the outpost showed up. Standing room only. Grey stood at the front, his Bible open, his reading glasses back in place. The cross around his neck glinted in the light. His torn sleeve had been mended, hiding the scars again. But now everyone knew they were there. He read from the same passage as before. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? But this time, when he spoke, there was no mockery, no whispers, just absolute attention. You know, Grey said, closing the Bible, people ask me how I reconcile being a man of God and a man of war, how I can preach peace on Sunday and train for violence the other 6 days. He looked out at the young faces watching him. The answer is simple. I protect the flock. That's what shepherds do. They don't just tend the sheep. They fight the wolves. He touched the cross at his chest. I spent 27 years as a Marine. I've taken lives, more than I care to count, and every single one weighs on my soul. Every single one is a name I carry. His voice was quiet now, heavy with memory, but I don't regret them, because each one meant that a Marine, someone's son, someone's brother, got to go home alive. And that's a weight I'll carry gladly. Corporal Jackson, sitting in the front row this time, raised his hand hesitantly. Chaplain, sir, why didn't you tell us about who you were? Grey smiled slightly. Would you have believed me? Would you have listened to an old man talking about ancient history? Jackson flushed, but shook his head honestly. No, sir. Sometimes, Grey said, people need to see the truth instead of being told it. You needed to see that strength isn't about being young or loud. It's about being ready when the moment demands it. He opened his Bible again. Now, let's talk about the armor of God. Because next week, we're going to discuss tactical combat principles from the book of Joshua. And yes, Corporal Jackson, there will be a quiz. Laughter rippled through the tent. Real laughter. Respectful laughter. After the service, Lieutenant Hayes approached Grey as he was cleaning up. Chaplain, can I ask you something? Of course. That call sign. The Chaplain's Devil. How did you get it? Grey was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant, looking at something 40 years in the past. Because even in the darkest moments, even surrounded by death and violence, I never stopped praying. For my brothers, for the enemy, for guidance. They thought it was strange, a killer who prayed, a devil who believed in God. He met Hayes' eyes. But that's the point, son. We're all capable of both, light and dark, good and evil. The question isn't whether you have darkness in you. It's whether you control it or it controls you. Hayes nodded slowly. How do you control it? Grey smiled and held up his Bible. Prayer, purpose, and brotherhood. In that order.